March 7th, 1945. Remagen, Germany. 3:15 p.m. Smoke drifts slowly above the Rhine River. On the western bank, American soldiers from the 9th Armored Division crouch behind shattered buildings overlooking the water. The river below is wide, dark, and moving fast, nearly 300 meters across in some places. Cold wind cuts across the bridge deck, and through the haze of smoke and dust, something unbelievable comes into view. The bridge is still standing. The steel arches of the Ludendorff Bridge stretch across the Rhine like a black skeleton against the grey sky. It should not be there. Every bridge across the Rhine was supposed to be destroyed. German engineers had orders to demolish them long before Allied forces could reach the river. Yet somehow, this one remains. For a few seconds, no one moves. Because everyone understands the same thing. If that bridge survives, even for a few minutes, it could change the entire war. Just hours earlier, the American advance through Western Germany had been moving cautiously. The Rhine River was the last great natural barrier protecting the heart of Germany. For months, Allied planners had expected a brutal crossing. The river was wide. The eastern bank heavily defended. German artillery positions overlooked nearly every possible crossing point. Most commanders believed forcing the Rhine would require a massive operation, carefully planned amphibious assaults, heavy bombardment, and thousands of soldiers. High casualties were considered inevitable. No one expected to cross quickly. Certainly not today. Now, standing on the western bank outside the town of Remagen, soldiers of Combat Command B stare across the water in disbelief. Captain Karl Timmermann, commanding Company A of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, lowers his binoculars slowly. The bridge is damaged. Sections of the roadway are cracked. Smoke rises from small demolition charges that had already detonated. But the structure itself is still intact. German troops can be seen retreating across it. Which means one thing. The Germans had tried to destroy the bridge and failed. Inside a nearby command vehicle, Brigadier General William Hoge receives the same report. An intact bridge across the Rhine. For a moment, the statement feels almost impossible. Every German defense plan had centered around preventing exactly this situation. If the Allies could cross the Rhine quickly, they could push directly into the industrial heartland of Germany. Factories, rail networks, supply centers. Everything sustaining the German war effort lay just beyond that river. Which is why the Rhine had always been considered the last defensive line. Until now, back at the riverbank, American officers study the bridge carefully. German machine gun fire crackles from the eastern side. Occasional artillery shells land nearby. The structure itself looks unstable. Steel beams twisted by earlier demolition attempts. Cracks running through the roadway. It could collapse at any moment. But waiting is not an option. Because German engineers will almost certainly try again. And next time, they might succeed. Captain Timmermann makes the decision. There is no time for a full assault plan. No time for large-scale coordination. If they want the bridge, they must move immediately. He turns toward his soldiers. Get ready to cross. The words hang in the cold air. Every man understands the risk. The bridge is still wired with explosives. German defenders occupy the far bank. Machine guns already sweep the structure. Crossing that span means running directly into enemy fire. And if the remaining demolition charges explode, the entire bridge could collapse into the river below. But the opportunity is too important to ignore. Within minutes, American infantry begin moving toward the bridge entrance. Smoke grenades burst across the roadway, filling the air with thick grey clouds. Machine guns open fire toward German positions across the river. Tank destroyers position themselves behind the buildings of Remagen, their cannons aimed at enemy bunkers on the eastern bank. Everything is happening faster than anyone expected. Because this crossing was never supposed to happen. The first American soldiers step onto the bridge. Boots strike the cracked roadway. The steel structure groans faintly under the sudden movement. Below them, the Rhine flows cold and relentless. German machine guns immediately open fire. Bullets ricochet off steel beams. Concrete chips explode from the roadway. The soldiers run forward, across a bridge that might collapse at any second. Behind them, engineers begin rushing toward the bridge as well. Their job is even more dangerous. German demolition charges are still attached to parts of the structure. If those explosives remain active, one switch could destroy the entire crossing. The engineers will have to disarm them under fire. Across the river, German defenders scramble to respond. They had believed the bridge would already be gone. Now American soldiers are charging across it, and the window to stop them is closing fast. Artillery positions begin firing toward the bridge. Shells explode along the riverbanks. The structure trembles with each nearby impact. Still, the Americans keep running, because everyone involved understands the same truth. This bridge was never meant to survive, and if they reach the far side before it falls, the entire war in Western Germany could suddenly accelerate. But halfway across the Ludendorff Bridge, a much more terrifying possibility emerges. The explosives might not be finished yet. March 7th, 1945. Ludendorff Bridge, Remagen. The first explosion hits beneath the bridge deck. A violent blast erupts from the steel structure as German demolition charges finally detonate. The entire bridge shudders violently. Flames burst from beneath the roadway. Chunks of steel and concrete scatter across the span. For a split second, every American soldier on the bridge believes the same thing. It's collapsing. Men instinctively throw themselves against the steel guardrails. Some drop flat against the roadway, bracing for the sudden plunge into the freezing Rhine below. But the bridge does not fall. Smoke pours upward from the damaged section, drifting into the cold afternoon air. The demolition attempt had triggered. Yet somehow, the charges had failed to destroy the structure. The Ludendorff Bridge still stands. The soldiers hesitate for only a moment. Then someone shouts, "Keep moving!" And the charge resumes. American infantry surge forward through the smoke, boots pounding across the damaged steel roadway. Machine gun fire crackles from the eastern riverbank. Bullets ricochet wildly off the iron framework of the bridge. Each impact sends a sharp metallic echo through the air. But the soldiers keep running, because stopping here exposed in the middle of the bridge would be suicide. Behind them, US Army engineers sprint onto the bridge carrying wire cutters and demolition kits. Their job is clear. Find every explosive charge still attached to the structure. Disarm it, before the Germans can detonate it again. The engineers move quickly along the steel beams, crouching low as machine gun fire continues sweeping the span. They begin spotting the first demolition wires. Thick cables running along the underside of the bridge. Some charges have already exploded. Others remain intact. One engineer kneels beside a bundle of explosives attached to a steel girder. His hands move quickly despite the shaking structure and incoming fire. Wire cutters snap through the detonator cable. One charge neutralized. Dozens more remain. Meanwhile, the infantry pushing across the bridge are nearing the eastern end. Captain Karl Timmerman leads from near the front of the formation. Smoke still hangs thick across the span, partially hiding their movement. But the German defenders can see enough. Machine gun nests positioned on the far bank begin firing harder now. Tracer rounds streak through the smoke. One soldier falls. Another dives behind a steel support beam. But the momentum of the assault continues. The Americans are too close now. Too committed to stop. On the eastern bank, German soldiers scramble to respond. Many of them had already begun retreating across the bridge minutes earlier. Now they realize the structure has become the enemy's path into Germany. Officers shout urgent orders. Machine gun teams reposition along defensive trenches overlooking the bridge exit. If they can stop the Americans here, at the end of the span, the crossing might still fail. But the window is closing rapidly. Back on the western bank, American armor begins firing across the river. Tank destroyers from the 14th Tank Battalion open up with high explosive shells aimed at German defensive positions. Each blast slams into the hillside above the bridge exit. Dirt and debris scatter across the enemy trenches. The supporting fire gives the infantry on the bridge exactly what they need. A few seconds of disruption. Just enough time. Captain Timmerman shouts again. Move! Move! The first American soldiers burst off the bridge and onto the eastern bank. Rifles immediately open fire. Grenades arc toward German machine gun nests. The firefight explodes into close combat along the riverbank. For a moment the outcome remains uncertain. German defenders still outnumber the initial assault force, but the Americans have momentum, and more soldiers are still charging across the bridge behind them. Back on the bridge itself, engineers continue racing against time. One demolition charge after another is discovered along the steel framework. Some have already failed. Others remain dangerously intact. Lieutenant Hugh Mott, one of the engineers working beneath the roadway, spots a large cluster of explosives attached to a major support beam. If this charge detonates properly, the entire central span could collapse. He crawls carefully toward the device, gripping his wire cutters tightly. Machine gun rounds snap through the steel above him. Still he keeps moving. The detonator wire runs along the beam. He reaches it. Cuts. The wire falls loose. Another critical charge disabled. Meanwhile, more American infantry continue flooding across the bridge. The structure creaks and groans beneath the growing weight of men and equipment. The damage from the earlier explosion has weakened parts of the span. Every step across it now carries a risk, but the crossing cannot slow down. Speed is the only advantage the Americans have. If they secure enough ground on the eastern bank quickly, German counterattacks might fail before they even begin. Within minutes, dozens of American soldiers have established a foothold beyond the river. They begin pushing outward from the bridge exit, clearing nearby buildings and trenches. German resistance remains fierce. But the defenders had never expected an attack here. Their positions are not fully prepared, and reinforcements are still scrambling to reach the area. Back at the center of the bridge, engineers cut the final visible demolition wires. The charges that remain attached to the structure are now effectively useless. The Germans had one chance to destroy the Ludendorff Bridge, and they had missed it. As more American troops cross the Rhine, the impossible realization spreads quickly across both sides of the battlefield. The Allies have done it. They have crossed the Rhine River, not with a massive planned invasion, not with thousands of boats, but with a sudden, improvised assault over a bridge that should never have existed. And now that the crossing has begun, an even larger problem is forming for the German defenders. Because American reinforcements are already on their way. March 7, 1945. Eastern bank of the Rhine, Remagen. 3:40 p.m. The first American soldiers hit the ground running. Boots slam into the muddy riverbank as infantry from the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion spread out from the end of the Ludendorff Bridge. The air is thick with smoke and gunfire. German defenders scramble through trenches carved into the hillside above the river. Rifles crack. Machine guns chatter. Grenades explode between shattered buildings along the edge of the town. But the Americans are already moving too fast. The entire crossing has caught the German defenders off balance. Captain Karl Timmerman pushes his men forward beyond the bridge exit. They cannot stay crowded near the river. If the Germans concentrate artillery here, the entire bridgehead could be wiped out in minutes. The orders are clear. Push inland. Secure high ground. Expand the perimeter. Every yard gained away from the bridge makes the crossing safer for the troops still pouring across behind them. Back on the bridge, the traffic is becoming constant. More infantry units run across the damaged roadway. Engineers guide soldiers around sections weakened by the earlier explosion. Smoke still drifts across the steel framework. But the structure holds. Every minute it remains standing brings more American soldiers onto German soil. On the western bank, commanders begin realizing the scale of what is happening. The crossing is not just a small raid. It is becoming a full bridgehead. General William Hoge, commanding Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division, immediately orders additional units toward Remagen. Tanks. Infantry. Artillery. Everything available must reach the bridge as quickly as possible. because the opportunity is enormous. If they can reinforce the foothold across the Rhine quickly enough, the Allies will bypass months of planning and jump directly into the heart of Germany. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the river, the Americans continue pushing outward. The first objective is a small railway tunnel carved into the hillside overlooking the bridge. German troops retreat toward the tunnel entrance, attempting to establish a defensive position. But the Americans close the distance rapidly. Rifle fire echoes off the stone walls. Several German soldiers surrender. Others flee deeper into the tunnel system. Within minutes, the Americans secure the position, and with it, control of the high ground above the bridge. A critical advantage. But the Germans are already reacting. Inside command posts across the region, urgent messages spread quickly. The Rhine has been crossed. At Remagen. And the bridge is still intact. The news feels almost impossible. For years, the Rhine had been seen as Germany's last natural defense in the West. Every plan assumed the river would slow the Allied advance for weeks, maybe longer. But now American soldiers are already standing on the eastern bank. German commanders begin rushing reinforcements toward Remagen. Infantry units redeploy from nearby sectors. Artillery batteries are ordered to target the bridge. And the Luftwaffe, Germany's struggling air force, is instructed to prepare immediate attacks against the crossing. The order is simple. Destroy the Ludendorff Bridge. At any cost. Back at the river, American engineers are already preparing for that possibility. While infantry continue crossing the bridge, engineers begin assembling pontoon bridging equipment along the western bank. If the Ludendorff Bridge collapses, replacement bridges must be ready. Speed remains everything. The more troops they can move across the Rhine before German forces react fully, the harder it will become to push them back. As the afternoon fades toward evening, the American foothold across the river grows steadily. Dozens of infantry squads move through the narrow streets of Remagen's eastern district. German defenders attempt scattered counterattacks. But their coordination is weak. The shock of the sudden crossing has disrupted their command structure. Many units simply were not positioned to defend this sector. Captain Timmerman pauses briefly near a ridge overlooking the river. Below him, the Ludendorff Bridge stretches across the Rhine like a wounded giant. Smoke rises from damaged sections of the steel structure. Yet soldiers continue crossing. Hundreds now. Soon thousands. The impossible crossing is turning into something much larger, an invasion route into Germany itself. But the danger is far from over. Across the sky above the Rhine, distant aircraft engines begin to grow louder. German aircraft. And they are heading directly toward the bridge. March 8, 1945. Remagen, Germany. Early morning. The sky above the Rhine is grey and heavy. Cold wind sweeps across the river as American soldiers continue moving across the Ludendorff Bridge. Through the night, the crossing had never stopped. Infantry units. Supply trucks. Engineers carrying equipment. Every minute the bridge remained standing meant more Allied troops on the eastern bank. But everyone understood the same thing. The Germans would not allow this to continue for long. Just after sunrise, the first warning shout echoes across the riverbank. Aircraft. American soldiers look up. Dark shapes appear through the low clouds, flying fast and low toward the bridge. German Luftwaffe bombers. Desperate. Determined. Their mission is simple. Destroy the bridge. Air raid sirens wail across the American positions. Anti-aircraft guns immediately open fire. 50 caliber machine guns mounted on half-tracks begin firing streams of tracer rounds into the sky. The first German aircraft dives toward the bridge. A bomb releases from its belly. The pilot pulls up sharply as the bomb whistles downward. Seconds later, a violent explosion erupts in the river beside the bridge. Water erupts high into the air. The structure shakes violently. But the bomb misses. The bridge still stands. More aircraft follow. German pilots dive again and again through the wall of anti-aircraft fire. Some release bombs too early. Others too late. A few come dangerously close. One bomb slams into the steel framework of the bridge. The explosion sends fragments of metal and debris flying across the river. But incredibly, the main structure holds. The damage is severe, yet the crossing remains open. The Luftwaffe attacks continue throughout the morning. Wave after wave of aircraft attempt to destroy the bridge. Fighter bombers, dive bombers, anything Germany can still send into the sky. But American anti-aircraft defenses have grown stronger with every hour. Dozens of guns now surround the bridge. The sky above the Rhine becomes a storm of flak bursts and tracer fire. Several German aircraft explode in midair. Others spiral into the river below. The attacks continue, but the results remain the same. The Ludendorff Bridge refuses to fall. When air attacks fail, German commanders try something even more dangerous. Special demolition teams. Under cover of darkness, small groups of German engineers attempt to reach the bridge. Some swim across the freezing Rhine carrying explosives. Others approach along the riverbanks, hoping to plant charges beneath the structure. But American patrols catch many of them before they reach their target. Machine gun fire cuts through the darkness. Several swimmers disappear beneath the icy water. The sabotage attempts fail. Desperate for another solution, German commanders turn to one final weapon. V-2 rockets. The same ballistic missiles that had terrorized London. Now they are aimed at the bridge. Several rockets launch from sites deep inside Germany. They streak high above the atmosphere before plunging down toward the Rhine. But V-2 rockets are notoriously inaccurate. Most explode miles away from the bridge. One lands several hundred meters downstream. Another strikes a hillside far from the crossing. None hit the target. Meanwhile, the American buildup across the Rhine accelerates rapidly. By the end of March 8th, more than 8,000 Allied troops have crossed the river. Engineers work day and night strengthening the bridge structure. Temporary repairs reinforce damaged steel beams. Traffic across the span remains constant. Soldiers march. Vehicles rumble across the weakened roadway. The bridge groans under the strain, but it holds. On the eastern bank, the bridgehead continues expanding. American units push farther inland, capturing nearby towns and securing defensive positions against possible German counterattacks. The initial foothold has now become something far more dangerous for Germany. A permanent crossing. And with every passing hour, the number of Allied troops east of the Rhine grows larger. For German commanders, the situation becomes terrifyingly clear. If the Allies hold the Remagen crossing, they can pour entire divisions into central Germany. Factories, railroads, industrial cities. Everything sustaining the German war effort lies beyond the river. And now the door is open. Inside Allied headquarters, the realization spreads just as quickly. What began as a sudden opportunity has become a strategic breakthrough. A river barrier that planners expected to cost thousands of lives to cross has been seized almost by accident. And the speed of the crossing has shocked everyone. Because brute force had not opened the Rhine. Speed had. Coordination had. And the decision to act without hesitation. But the Ludendorff Bridge is still heavily damaged. Engineers, studying the structure, notice worrying signs. Steel supports are bent. Sections of the roadway are weakening. Every additional vehicle crossing increases the stress. The bridge is still standing, but not forever. And if it collapses too soon, thousands of soldiers already across the Rhine could suddenly find themselves cut off. March 17th, 1945. Remagen, Germany. 3 p.m. For 10 days, the Ludendorff Bridge had defied every expectation. Bombs had fallen around it. Artillery shells had struck near its supports. German aircraft had attacked it again and again. Yet the steel structure remained standing over the Rhine, carrying a constant stream of Allied troops and vehicles into the heart of Germany. By the morning of March 17th, the bridge had already done something remarkable. More than 25,000 American soldiers, along with tanks, artillery pieces, and thousands of tons of supplies, had crossed into the eastern bank. The bridgehead across the Rhine was now firmly established, but the bridge itself was dying. US Army engineers working around the structure had been watching it closely for days. The earlier German demolition blast had severely weakened several critical supports. Repeated air attacks had twisted sections of steel. Heavy traffic across the span placed enormous stress on the damaged framework. Every hour the bridge remained open was a risk. Still, commanders kept the crossing active as long as possible, because every additional soldier across the river strengthened the foothold. That afternoon, several engineers were inspecting structural damage along the center span. Private Michael Chinchar and other members of the engineering team walked carefully across the cracked roadway. The steel beneath their boots creaked faintly, a sound that had become disturbingly common. Suddenly, a sharp metallic crack echoed through the structure. One of the support beams shifted. Another groaned loudly under the strain. Engineers immediately understood the danger. The bridge was failing. Someone shouted a warning. "Get off the bridge!" Within seconds, soldiers and engineers began running toward the western bank. Some dropped their equipment and sprinted. Others barely made it halfway across the span. Then the steel framework gave way. With a violent roar of twisting metal, the center of the Ludendorff Bridge collapsed. The entire span folded inward like a broken spine. Steel girders snapped. Concrete shattered. And the structure plunged into the icy water of the Rhine. The collapse sent massive waves rolling outward across the river. Sections of the bridge crashed into the water with tremendous force. Smoke and dust rose above the wreckage. Within moments, the once mighty structure that had shocked the world by surviving its demolition attempt was gone. After 10 days of holding against every attack, the Ludendorff Bridge had finally fallen. But by the time it collapsed, the bridge had already completed its mission. The crossing had succeeded. Thousands of Allied troops were now firmly positioned on the eastern bank, and American engineers had already constructed pontoon bridges nearby to replace the fallen structure. Within hours of the collapse, supply convoys were already using those temporary bridges to continue the advance. The crossing would not stop. News of the bridge's collapse spread quickly through the Allied command network. Yet there was no panic, no crisis, because the most dangerous part of the operation had already succeeded days earlier. The Allies had crossed the Rhine, and they were staying there. On the German side, the reaction was very different. Adolf Hitler had been furious when he learned the Ludendorff Bridge had been captured intact. The failure to destroy the bridge immediately had been seen as a catastrophic mistake. Several German officers responsible for defending the crossing were court-martialed. Some were even executed. But by the time the bridge finally collapsed, the damage had already been done. The Allies were across the Rhine in force, and Germany no longer had the strength to push them back. Across the eastern bank of the river, American forces continued expanding their bridgehead. Downs fell quickly. German defensive lines began retreating deeper into the country. The river barrier that had once been considered the last great obstacle to the Allied advance had now been breached. And it had happened far faster than anyone had predicted. What had been expected to become one of the bloodiest river crossings of the war had instead turned into something completely different. A moment of opportunity. A moment of speed. A moment where soldiers acted before the enemy fully understood what was happening. The Ludendorff Bridge was never supposed to survive long enough for any of this to occur. Yet for 10 critical days, it had. Long enough to open the door into Germany itself. Historians would later look back at the Remagen crossing as one of the most unexpected turning points of the final months of World War II. Not because it involved the largest armies, not because it was the most carefully planned operation, but because it showed what could happen when soldiers moved faster than the situation itself. Speed replaced brute force. Improvisation replaced months of planning. And a crossing that should have cost thousands of lives happened almost by surprise. Within weeks of the crossing, Allied armies would push deep into central Germany. The war in Europe was entering its final chapter. And it had accelerated in ways very few commanders had predicted. All because one bridge failed to fall when it was supposed to.